You saw something you had never seen before. Not the rage. You had seen the rage. Not the manipulation. You knew that too. Something different. Something that looked, for just a moment, like the whole structure coming down. And before I tell you what that was, I need to tell you something first. 90% of people who witness a narcissistic collapse go back. 90%. Not because they are naive, not because they did not see what they saw, but because of something that happens after the collapse that nobody prepares you for. And today, by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what that is and how to be ready for it when it comes. Because it is coming. Let me take you back to the moment. The confidence that was always slightly too large for the room, gone. The certainty that they were right about everything, cracking. The performance of superiority that had been so consistent you had started to believe it was simply who they were, collapsing. And what was underneath was something you were not prepared for. Not strength, not the person you had been fighting against for so long. Something that looked terrifyingly like nothing. Like someone who had never actually been there at all. You did not know what you were seeing. You just knew it frightened you. And you did not understand, then, why seeing them fall apart made you feel more afraid than their cruelty ever had. This video is going to answer that, completely. Stay until the end, because what I am going to tell you in the last section, the thing nobody says directly to people who witnessed a collapse, is going to change how you understand not just that moment, but everything. Let me start with what you need to understand about how a narcissist is constructed, because you cannot understand the collapse without understanding what is collapsing. A narcissist does not experience themselves the way most people do. Most people have a relatively stable internal sense of who they are. Not perfect, not without insecurity, but a baseline, a core that persists regardless of what the room thinks of them. A narcissist does not have this. What they have instead is a construction, a carefully maintained false self, assembled from external validation, from admiration, from the constant supply of other people's reactions, that functions as a substitute for the stable internal core they never developed. And this construction requires maintenance, constant, relentless, exhausting maintenance. Every interaction must affirm it. Every person in their world must reflect back the version of themselves they need to see. Every challenge, every criticism, every failure, every moment where reality contradicts the false self must be managed, deflected, projected, denied. Because the false self is not built on anything solid. And a construction with no solid foundation is always, always one significant blow away from coming down. The narcissistic collapse is that blow landing. Now let me tell you what causes it specifically. The first cause is a significant loss of narcissistic supply. Supply. The attention, admiration, validation, control they extract from the people around them is not a luxury for a narcissist. It is structural. It is what holds the construction up. When the supply is cut, when you go no contact, when you stop reacting, when the people around them stop providing what the construction requires, the construction begins to destabilize. Not immediately, but inevitably, because there is nothing underneath it holding it up. The second cause is a direct threat to the false self: public humiliation, a failure they cannot explain away, being caught in a lie too large to survive, being confronted directly, undeniably, with evidence that contradicts the version of themselves they have been presenting. When that false self is directly threatened, when the gap between who they perform being and who they actually are becomes visible, the system cannot hold, and it collapses. The third cause is losing control of the narrative. A narcissist's world depends on controlling the story. Who is right? Who is wrong? Who is the victim? Who is the villain? When they lose control of that narrative, when the people around them start comparing notes, when the truth starts emerging through cracks they cannot seal, the construction they have built their entire identity on begins to shake. And a shaking construction either stabilizes or falls. Now let me show you exactly what a narcissistic collapse looks like, because here is where most people are confused. They expect the collapse to look like defeat, like remorse, like the person finally seeing themselves clearly and being broken by what they see. It does not look like that. The first thing it looks like is disproportionate rage.
A small thing, a question, a boundary, a simple refusal, producing a response so outsized, so vicious, so far beyond what the situation requires, that the people around it are left stunned. That is not strength. That is the false self defending itself from exposure. The second thing it looks like is complete decompensation, the performance dropping entirely, the version of themselves they have maintained so consistently suddenly unavailable. What remains when the performance is stripped away? The disorganized, dysregulated, genuinely frightened person underneath, visible for the first time. This is the moment you might have witnessed, the one that frightened you more than their cruelty did. Because for a moment, just a moment, you saw what was actually there. And what was actually there was not the powerful person you had been navigating. It was someone who had never learned to exist without the construction. Someone who, without the supply, without the false self, without the performance, did not know who they were. The third thing it looks like is vindictive escalation. Because when a narcissist cannot restabilize through normal means, cannot restore the supply, cannot reestablish the narrative, they escalate. Smear campaigns, legal threats, using children as weapons, going after your professional reputation, trying to destroy what you have built, not out of strategic calculation, out of desperation. The desperation of a construction that is falling and will cause whatever damage it can in the attempt to save itself. And now, here is what nobody says. Here is the part that nobody talks about. And I'm going to stop here because I need you to really hear this. In a moment, I'm going to tell you about what happens after the collapse. The thing that pulls 90% of people back. The thing that is so specific, so perfectly aimed, so apparently real, that it works even when you know what it is. But first, I need you to understand what you are actually dealing with. Because without this understanding, what comes next will work on you. And I do not want it to work on you. A narcissist who is collapsing is not a narcissist who is changing. A narcissist who is collapsing is a narcissist who has lost their supply. And a narcissist who has lost their supply will do whatever it takes to restore it, including, and especially,
appearing to be exactly the person you always hoped they would become. Now, here is the thing that happens after the collapse. The thing that pulls 90% of people back. You get a message. Maybe it comes directly. Maybe it comes through someone else. Maybe it is an email or a voicemail or a note left somewhere you will find it. And it sounds different from anything you have received before. Not the confident version, not the entitled version, not the version that made you feel small, broken, genuine. The message sounds like someone who finally sees themselves clearly, who acknowledges what they did, who says the words you spent years waiting to hear. And something happens in your nervous system that you cannot control. Because this version is the one you always believed was underneath everything. The one you stayed for. The one you worked so hard to reach. And now it is here. And everything in you wants to respond. Not because you are naive, not because you forgot what happened, because you are human, and you have been conditioned by every good moment in the relationship, by the intermittent reinforcement, by the years of almost, to respond to exactly this. And this is the most dangerous moment of the entire collapse. Not the rage, not the vindictive escalation. This quiet moment, this message, this version of them that looks the most real. I need to tell you something about what this actually is. The vulnerability after a narcissistic collapse is real. They are genuinely destabilized, genuinely suffering, genuinely reaching. But genuine suffering does not mean genuine change. And genuine reaching does not mean reaching toward something new. It means reaching for what restabilized them before, which is you. And if you respond, if the door opens even slightly, the restabilization begins. And once the restabilization is complete, once the supply is restored, once the construction is back, the version that reached for you will be gone, replaced by the one you left. This has happened before, more than once, and it will happen again, unless you understand what you are seeing. Now, I need to stop here and speak to you directly, because I know what is happening inside you right now. You are thinking, but what if this time is different? What if the collapse actually changed something? What if I am being too rigid, too closed, missing a genuine transformation? I hear that. And I need to tell you something honest. The question of whether someone has genuinely changed is answered by behavior over time, not by a message. Not by the most vulnerable version of them appearing after a collapse. Not by the version of them that looks the most like what you always hoped was there. By sustained, consistent, external behavioral evidence over a significant period of time. Without your presence being required for it to happen. Without your response being the condition for it continuing. If genuine change is happening, it will still be visible 6 months from now, a year from now, without you needing to be there to witness it. The message after the collapse is not evidence of change. It is evidence of supply loss. And the difference between those two things is everything. Now let me tell you what the collapse does to the people around it, because this is where the damage that nobody talks about lives. The first thing it does is activate your helping impulse. If you have been in this person's orbit for any length of time, if you have been the emotional infrastructure, the manager of their world, The sight of visible distress activates everything that made you that person. The impulse to soothe, to fix, to reach toward the visible suffering and do something about it. And that impulse, while it comes from something genuinely human and genuinely caring in you, is exactly what they are counting on, consciously or not. The second thing the collapse does is create confusion about what you witnessed. Because the distress was real, the emptiness was real, and genuine distress in a person who has caused you harm creates a specific kind of disorientation that can be very difficult to navigate. They were real in that moment, and they were also dangerous. Both of those things are true. The third thing the collapse does is make you feel responsible for it. Particularly if your boundary, your no contact, your refusal to continue, was what triggered it. The sight of someone falling apart in response to your decision to protect yourself can feel, in your nervous system if not in your mind, like you caused their suffering. You did not. You withdrew something that was never yours to provide indefinitely. Your boundary is not the cause of their collapse. Their lack of internal foundation is. And now, imagine this moment. You see their name, on your phone, in an email, somewhere, and something happens that has never happened before. Nothing. No flood, no pull, no urgent need to respond, no nervous system hijack, just clarity. The specific, quiet clarity of knowing exactly what you are looking at. And knowing, without drama, without effort, that you do not need to respond. That moment, that specific, quiet moment, is what you are working toward. And it comes, for everyone who does this work. It comes, not dramatically, not in a single moment of healing, quietly, one day, when you are not even looking for it, it just arrives. Now, what actually helps? The first thing is not confusing genuine distress with genuine change. Distress is real. Change requires something the distress alone cannot produce. The internal architecture to process that suffering in a way that builds something different. Compassion for the suffering is possible. Clarity about what it means and does not mean is also possible, both at the same time. The second thing is protecting yourself specifically from the post-collapse period. This is when you are most at risk, not from their strength, from their vulnerability. Hold whatever brought you to this point, not because the reaching is not real, because what comes after the restabilization is. The third thing is understanding what you actually witnessed. The collapse, the moment the mask fell, the moment you saw what was actually underneath, was the most honest moment in the relationship. Not the confident performance, not the certainty, not the superiority, the emptiness. That was real, and it told you everything you needed to know. The fourth thing is grieving what the collapse confirmed, because for many people, for people who spent years hoping that somewhere underneath the construction, there was a person capable of genuinely loving them, the collapse is the final confirmation. There was never a version of the relationship that was going to be what you needed it to be. Not because of you, because the person who could have given you that was never fully there. The false self was, and the false self cannot love. It can only perform. Grieving this, fully, without the qualifier of, but they were suffering, is not cruelty. It is the most honest response to what you finally saw. And now, the thing I promised you. The thing nobody says directly to people who witnessed a narcissistic collapse. Here it is. The reason the collapse frightened you more than their cruelty did
The reason that moment stayed with you in a way that the rage and the manipulation did not is not because it was worse.
It is because it was true. Every other moment in the relationship involved the construction between you and whatever was actually there. In the collapse, just for a moment, the construction dropped, and you saw something real. And what was real was not what you had been told was there. And somewhere in you, the part that had been insisting for years that something was wrong, that what they showed you was not the whole picture, that the confidence and the certainty could not possibly be what they appeared. That part finally had its evidence. The collapse did not just show you who they were. It confirmed what you already knew. You were not wrong. You were never wrong. You just did not have the evidence yet. And now you do. The mask fell. And underneath it was not the person you hoped was there. Underneath it was the truth. And the truth, as painful as it is the only thing that actually sets you free. If this video gave you language for something you witnessed and never fully understood, please share it with one person who is still confused about what they saw. Tell them it was not a breakthrough. It was a confirmation. Subscribe, because this channel exists to give you the clarity that the relationship was designed to prevent you from having. I will see you in the next one.